All right, hi there, everyone. Adam Benigni, Sal Maiorana. Welcome to Believe in Bills. Recording early here on this Wednesday afternoon. We've just heard from defensive coordinator Bobby Babich out at One Bills Drive, and kind of our midweek edition. Sal, how you doing?
I am good on this lovely early October afternoon in Western New York.
Yeah, right.
I hate the heat, Adam, but man, it's a little bit crazy that it's 60 degrees in August here in Rochester. A little nuts.
Same in Buffalo. I mean, I was out last night, and it is. It's. I had like a zip up on and everything, and it's kind of interesting that you make that point because
I think Babich made it too today, right? He started off his press conference today talking about the weather. Which
we can get into the fact they got to play early in Miami this year. It probably doesn't help them all that much. They probably want to crank up the temperatures as much as possible, but kind of to that point, the Bills' injury situation resembles the fact that it would be October or even November. And that kind of looms over everything as they get ready for the final preseason game here against Carolina on Saturday. And that's where I want to start. A lot of talk among the fan base, but I do think it's a very wise decision by Sean McDermott to dial things back and not play the starters in this final preseason game. They've got a lot of evaluating to do anyway. But definitely err on the side of caution, given how severe things are that could very well and will likely impact things into the regular season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I never really expected that Allen was going to play, for instance, and most of the top line guys. But he has basically said that none of the starters, or at least the presumed starters, are going to be out there. So that's fine. He knows what those guys can do, and there's no sense risking injury, especially given the injury list they've already got. They can't. There's some of those guys in that list, Adam, that we're less than 3 weeks now from opening day. Some of those guys might not be back. So that's for a while here we were saying it's preseason. There's time for. Well, the regular season is upon us here, so they really can't afford to get much more hurt in this game. So they've got a bunch of spots at the end of the roster that they've got to figure out. Several position groups really are not settled yet. So that's what this game is going to be all about. I mean, those of you who have tickets, it might be some ugly, ugly football. I think what we in the media, Adam, are rooting for is both teams just run the ball all afternoon and get it over in 2 hours and 45 minutes, maybe. But it's going to be a rough Saturday afternoon out there. If you're looking for a great game, I think you'll be disappointed by what you're going to see.
Well, and I think the Bills' quarterback situation feeds into that, right? I mean, we recorded on
Did you ever think we'd be in a world where we're going to watch Ben DiNucci and Anthony Brown play quarterback in Orchard Park?
I know, right? But I mean, we had recorded on Monday, and we had talked about the fact that they were going to need to go out and sign a guy to get through this last preseason game, and then see with the roster cuts next week if someone with a better looking resume becomes available to potentially bring in here. And the questions about Mitch Trubisky week to week and his overall level of performance. But let's talk about Brown. That news came down shortly after we finished our recording on Monday. So let's bring folks up to speed on that in terms of our takes. I mean, and we're not alone. This is to get them through this final preseason game.
Oh, yeah. Nobody should even be thinking that Anthony Brown is going to be on the – well, I shouldn't say that. Maybe Anthony Brown will be better than DiNucci, and he'll end up being the practice squad quarterback. So I should not totally rule him out of the picture. We'll see. But look, this is an undrafted free agent who came into the league in 2022, was with the Ravens on the practice squad, and they had to activate him late that year because Lamar Jackson was hurt, and then I think Andy Dalton was the backup. So he actually started a game in the NFL. So he's thrown some passes for real. It wasn't successful. He lost to the Bengals, but he has played a little bit. And then last year they cut him. I think he might have been on the practice squad. Maybe he wasn't. He was out of the league maybe last year. And then the Raiders signed him in January, and they just cut him last weekend. So he was out there. He had been in a training camp all summer, and I guess with the Raiders all spring too. So that's why the Bills ended up signing him, because he had been playing. Some of these guys aren't even with teams yet. So it made sense to bring Anthony Brown in. I was at practice yesterday, and he was mainly a spectator. He was standing with one of the assistant coaches. I wasn't sure who it was, actually. It wasn't Joe Brady, though. And he was just watching practice. getting a feel for what the Bills are going to try to run on Saturday. And then they gave him a few snaps at the end of practice. So I'm not over there today, but I'm sure he's getting more of a look because they do have to get him ready to play the game. So, yeah, DiNucci will start, Brown will finish. And then, hey, that may determine maybe one of those guys is going to be the practice squad quarterback, at least just for the start of the season.
That's an interesting frame of reference, in that context for that particular position. I mean, at this point, you hear Joe Brady talk about it. It's just figuring out what plays they're actually comfortable with.
Yeah.
I'm simplifying things as much as possible and then kind of rolling with that again, just to get through this game. But I suppose, it's an adverse situation. So I suppose it is an opportunity to figure a few things out about a potential player like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And they got to have a third quarterback. I mean, I think Buechele, the way Sean was talking about his neck injury, I don't think they're anticipating him being in the picture. So you got to have three. Again, we've talked about the fact that I don't think either of these two guys is going to be the backup. That might not be filled based on what Trubisky's injury situation looks like. That may not get filled till next week after the cuts are made. There will be guys who come available. And then it'll be very interesting to watch and see how the Bills fill that position.
Well, I'll go back to something we talked about earlier in the week. Is Mitch Trubisky, when he's back and healthy, is he even the answer at the number 2 quarterback position?
Well, I think, Adam, they want him to be, right? I mean, they re-signed him because for whatever reason, they do like him. You and I talked about this on Monday that I didn't understand the reasoning for bringing him back. He did nothing in 21 because he didn't need to. And then he went for his second starting opportunity in Pittsburgh and he blew it. He was terrible. So I don't know what the Bills keep seeing in Mitch Trubisky. Maybe he's just, the best of a really bad lot of backup quarterbacks that were available. But again, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when cut day comes, because I think there will be players. Oh, there's one name. I don't think it's going to happen, but Trey Lance is part of a 3 quarterback competition down in Dallas. I mean, that's a former, number 3 overall pick in the draft. Again, I don't think it's going to happen that he'll go on the market, but you never know. There may be better options than Mitch Trubisky after the cuts are made. So
I think they've got to open their mind to it. I think their mind is open to it, right?
Yeah, I agree.
It has to be.
It's quarterback. You've got to make sure you've got one, because we talked about it on Monday. We're knocking on wood repeatedly here with Josh Allen, and you just hope that he can get through another season, but it's football and crazy things happen in football.
Speaking of Josh Allen, we know where his game stands, but this is a topic that we addressed earlier in training camp, but especially true, I think, now, given the fact they decided to hold him out, I think also wisely in wet conditions down in Pittsburgh, and he will not play in this preseason finale against the Carolina Panthers on Saturday. With this new group of receivers and in the midst of the process of moving on from Stephon Diggs, how much value in terms of your analysis do you place on game reps versus what they do in practice, preseason game reps, and is there a shortfall there as far as Allen being up to speed with this new group of receivers?
I don't think so, Adam. I think the preseason games are kind of meaningless for Josh Allen. All that work, that timing, the chemistry, that all happens in practice, and they get plenty of reps. He goes through the whole cycle of the primary receiver. He wasn't often throwing to Lawrence Keys, who's no longer on the team. So he was getting the reps that he needed. The difference this week is that he's minus a couple guys that he wouldn't be getting reps with in practice or if he played in the game. Curtis Samuel's now out. Marquez Valdez-Scantling is out. Those are 2 guys that I think we all figured were going to make the final roster. So he's losing opportunity there. But no, in general, I don't think the preseason means anything. Yeah, everyone talks about, get the kinks out, knock off some of the rust, whatever. He did that in the first game. I agreed with the decision to sit him out in Pittsburgh, and I certainly agree having him sit out in this game. He's fine. He doesn't need preseason.
Right. Well, I think the one thing they might get, maybe it's more about the receiver than it is the quarterback at this point, but they both play into it as a timing issue against another defense in a game situation itself. But by and large, I absolutely agree with you. And a guy I think that during the course of at least the preseason games, I think we've seen a lot from Keon Coleman in training camp, right?
Yeah.
But in the games, he hasn't made the types of catches that we expected him to make. It's preseason. It's very early. I don't want to read too much into this, but I mean, he dropped what should have been a touchdown catch against the Steelers on Saturday night. You wrote about it in the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle, and I like the fact that Keon Coleman, when he at his press conference yesterday, stepped up and owned the fact that he should have made that catch. That's what you want to hear from a guy at his stage in his rookie year, I think.
Absolutely. I asked the question directly. I said, "What did you think of that play? Did you need to make that play?" And he did not hesitate. He said, "Definitely. That was a ball that was there to be caught, and he didn't make the catch." And he was disappointed by that. There was a lot of banter about that play on social media, Adam, about, Trubisky stinks and it wasn't a good ball to catch. You can't blame Coleman for not selling out. Adam, he wouldn't have had to sell out. The ball was there. He just short-armed it. If he sticks his arms out, and the ball did hit him in the hands, by the way. If he sticks his arms out a little bit further, it should have been a pretty routine catch. And, yeah, that safety he had beaten the corner. The safety was coming down, but it wasn't like he was going to get blown up on the play. He should have caught the ball, and I liked the fact that he owned it. He came right out and said, "Never mind Mitch Trubisky throwing a bad ball. That was on me. I've got to be better." So good attitude to have. And, he was asked later in the presser about, we got to see his personality, and he was the fun-loving guy. The fans loved him when he came in. But he said, "Yeah, I showed you some personality, but don't mistake that for what my mission is here." He wants to become a great NFL player. And I can tell you, I've been in a couple of his press gatherings at training camp, and he is a different guy with the media. Quite frankly, he's been boring. Everyone thought he was going to be this energetic kid and a riot at press conferences. He has really toned it back, and he's been all business, all football. I think McDermott, that's the way McDermott likes his guys to be when they talk to the media. Maybe a couple of his teammates said, "Hey, kid, calm down."
Yeah, right.
But he's been a different guy than he was the day after the draft, talking about his jacket and the cookies and all the other nonsense.
Yeah, well, that's just it. I mean, he won the early press conferences hands down, created, he got a great rise out of the fan base, and that's all well and good. But especially when they get to the regular season, if he's not catching balls like the one he dropped this past Saturday night against Pittsburgh, all of that is going to be, not only will it go out the window, it's going to kind of come back on him, because the results in game when the regular season starts, I mean, that's what it's going to be all about, and that's how he's going to be judged and regarded and all of those things. And he knows that. And it wouldn't surprise me if, whether it was Sean McDermott, Brady, maybe a teammate or two, internally, in terms of the culture they've built, kind of the environment, inside that locker room and those types of things in that organization, if someone didn't say to him, "Hey, great start in front of the microphone, but maybe tone it down just a bit and let your play do the talking."
Yeah, I remember Brandon Beane saying, we asked him about, "What'd you learn about Keon that you didn't know?" And he, "Well, I didn't realize he was that funny." Well, yeah, okay, we found that out. But even Beane has said since then, the kid has been nose to the grindstone. He's going forward, and he's trying to be, the best player he can be for the Bills as a rookie. And it will be tough. It's going to be a tough go for him. I think there's still parts of his game that need developing. We've seen that, right? We talked about the red zone targets the other day. This is 3 times now they've tried to throw a touchdown pass to him, and he hasn't been able to come through. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it was good to see yesterday. I got the sense that Coleman's head is on straight, and he knows there's a lot of work to do here.
That kind of brings us to an interesting point that continues to come up in these press conferences. It's been a theme through the course of training camp and really the offseason, and justifiably so, about this leadership void, right? Or new leaders needing to emerge, given the turnover, given some of the veterans and leadership and experience that they lost as they turn over this roster and kind of reset it, so to speak. Bobby Babich, the defensive coordinator, was asked about it here on this Wednesday, and he said that he started to see a couple of players emerge. But with regard, he didn't want to name them for obvious reasons, but with regard to that, I don't think you're really going to get a sense of it until we get into the regular season. They can pick captains and do all the things that they're going to need to do during the course of the preseason. That can elevate some players into those roles, right, and kind of spur that along. But the true test and the true leaders, in my opinion, are going to emerge when the games start for real, and when they face some adversity, when things, if they go down to Miami in week 2, for example, and early in that week and, experience some, a tough result or whatever, I'm speculating here, but that's when you'll see the true leaders on this team begin to emerge.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. They're going to pick captains next week, and we could probably make guesses. I mean, I'm sure Terrell Bernard is going to be a captain this year. Maybe they turn on defense to Ed Oliver. I've never considered him a leader type, but he is probably the best defensive lineman on the team. I would lean more towards Daquan Jones if that's the way they're going to go. But those guys can be captains, and it's important to have good leaders. But you need to do your leadership by how you perform on the field, not so much how you talk in the locker room. At least that's how I've always felt. Don't let your actions speak for you, right? So they can pick whoever they want to be captain. Those guys have got to be impactful when the game starts. So I'm not, again, and the captains in football, Adam, I've told you how I feel about it. I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think it's all that big a deal in hockey. I think it's so overblown in hockey that a guy gets a C on his jersey. Oh, for crying out loud, score a goal, right? That's how you can show leadership.
Right.
Score a goal, make a save. So
right.
I get it. Captains are important, but they're not quite as important as so many fans tend to believe they are.
No, and it's your play on the field that ultimately does it. And by the way, regardless of who's announced next week or whatever, there's one guy on this team whose C is bigger than anybody else's, and he wears the number 17. Right?
Exactly.
They have that guy.
That's the quarterback. The quarterback is the captain. Generally, on every team there is, he's the most important player, and it all has to go through him. So to me, Josh Allen, who will be a captain, he'll be picked a captain, but that's where everything flows through, Adam. Even on the defense, he's still the guy. He's the face of the franchise. That's the guy who has to be the leader in that locker room.
That's what every NFL franchise covets, a player like that. And that's not to diminish leadership in other areas in the locker room and in meeting rooms and that sort of thing, and how it translates and how it brings other players along. But they have the leader they need in Josh Allen. I think everyone pretty much agrees with that. All right. And the time we have left here, we had decided this week to do something a little bit different and something we're going to do during the course of the season from time to time. And that's open things up on X to some questions, comments, those sorts of things to our listeners, our users and viewers. And we've got 3 of them today. So we want to be responsive to what the fans are wondering about, what they have to say, their opinions as well. We want to share them in this space on this show and Believe in Bills. So, Sal, why don't you, I know you had one that came in late before we were recorded. Why don't we go ahead and start with that?
All right. So Jeff Popple, who follows me on Twitter, he's a big Yankee guy too, follows my newsletter. I mean, we're interactive pretty good on Twitter. He said he wants to know, has the makeup of the kickoff teams changed much? Not so much individual people, but the positions they play, meaning when they go to pick who's going to cover and return these kicks, is it going to be less or more wide receivers, DBs, linebacks, and how will that impact the final roster? Now, you and I talked about this probably a couple of shows ago about with the new kickoff rule, there's going to be a need for maybe a different type of athlete on the kickoff team this year, right? It used to be you'd line up with the kicker and you wanted your fastest guys to get down there and make a tackle. Now, with the way it's set up, you need athletic guys, not so much the fastest guys, but certainly athletic guys, but also guys who can play like it's a regular scrimmage play, meaning you need some size and strength too, because there's going to be much more immediate individual blocking. So, yeah, I'm looking for, we saw it the other night, there's linebackers on that team now. There may be a couple backup, really athletic defensive linemen who will cover the kick because they can tackle. When you're blocking in the kick return, you may see at some point, they haven't really showed this yet, you might see a backup offensive lineman like Alec Anderson or Ryan DeMarco, whoever they throw out there. Because, again, it's more like a scrimmage play. So I think it's going to make up, or it's going to change the makeup of the back end of the roster a little bit. And that's why I think they might be keeping, for instance, 6 linebackers, right? You can make a case for some backup linebackers making the team just solely because of the kickoff. Yeah,
I think that it's also a work in progress.
Yeah.
Right? And Sean McDermott addressed that directly. They're watching, obviously, they're evaluating their own situation, but they're watching what everyone else does too, to see if there's something they can learn from it. So I think it's very interesting. It'll be very interesting to see how that factors into some of the decisions on cutdown day next week. So we appreciate the question. Chris Ocone follows me as well as you, Sal, on Twitter. Does Justin Shorter make the 53-man roster? And an interesting situation at receiver, obviously. What's your take on that?
I don't see a path for him. It's possible, maybe even likely, that they can get him back on the practice squad. I guess it's going to depend, though, Adam, on the long-term viability of Valdez-Scantling and Samuel. If before those two got hurt, there was no way Justin Shorter was making the team. He's done basically nothing. He has not popped in practice at all. He had an opportunity the other night in a one-on-one situation to make a play on a fade, didn't make the play. I mean, didn't even make a good attempt at it, which was, the least he could have done on that play, Adam, was go back for the ball and try to draw a pass interference. He basically just bailed and let the DB break it up. So I haven't seen nearly enough. He was hurt last year, missed the whole season. He's been hurt this year. He's missed part of training camp with an injury. So I don't think he is one of the best or one of the top six for sure. It's going to depend on Valdez-Scantling and Samuel and their situations going into the regular season.
Yeah, I think they like his talent, but the consistency, like you talked about, or lack thereof, and the expression. I mean, the best ability is availability, right? Yeah. It just hasn't been there.
We talked about we've mentioned Shavers. I mean, Shavers has done more by far in training camp. He hasn't done much in the games, and not really anybody has. Of course, last week you throw it out because there was no quarterback capable of throwing the ball. So it's been very tough to evaluate those back-end wide receivers. But Shavers overall has done more than Shorter. I think he's pretty much guaranteed a spot now. Again, going back to the injury situation, Shorter's a tough call for me.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's Shavers. I mean, the receivers, we're all kind of doing our projections at this point, and we'll see. You don't want to get too far into this with one preseason game where the emphasis is going to be left. This game where evaluation is going to be so much the emphasis, given the fact they're not playing the starters. But I mean, I've got Coleman, Shakir, Samuel, Valdez-Scantling, Hollins, Shavers.
Yeah, I mean that would be the six. I think we could pretty much all agree on. And then if Samuel and Valdez-Scantling aren't ready for opening day, that's two spots they got to fill. And I mean, one guy that you have to consider too is Andy Isabella. Now, he has not shown me much of anything as a receiver. He just really hasn't. Again, another guy who has kind of got lost in the shuffle in practice, but they have been continually using him, especially in practice, on kickoff return. And he hasn't really shown me much there either, quite frankly, Adam, but he would have a path if they start the season without Samuel and Valdez-Scantling just for that reason alone. So that's another guy that you may have to push ahead of Justin Shorter because he's not going to give you that availability on special teams the way Isabella will.
All right, good perspective on that. Final question here from Bill Took, one of our followers, and this looks ahead to the early part of the regular season now in the opener. Would it be wise to take the Arizona game as an example of load management, was the quote that he used, given the injury situation with the Miami game early that next week? I think what he's getting at there is it's an NFC opponent versus a divisional rival on a short week like that. Load management, I don't want to read too far into what he's trying to say there. I think you got to do everything possible, obviously, to win that game. In the bigger picture, I think you've started to see Sean McDermott kind of manage the load, and this is the fact he's sitting his starters out on Saturday is an example of that. I think around that game, in the run-up to preparation for Arizona, and especially after that Arizona game, and how they've got a lot of experience as a coaching staff dealing with short weeks, given the number of primetime games they've had with the success they've had. I think a lot of that gets put to use. Yes, you manage the load around each of those games, but you've got to go out. If you're fortunate enough to be up in the Arizona game comfortably, then maybe you factor in and take some people out. Aside from that, that's your opener, man. You got to do everything you possibly can to win it.
Yeah, like you said, the load management is happening right now in practice and not playing in the preseason. as I say all the time to every Yankee fan out there, even though there's 162 of them, every game matters, Adam. Every friggin' game matters. I don't care.
Right.
A game in April might end up costing you a division because you lost by one game because you pissed away a 5-run lead in the 9th inning. Every game matters. Nowhere is that more prevalent than the NFL, where there's only 17 of these games. You have to win the Arizona game and do everything in your power to make sure that gets done. If they get up 30 points in the fourth quarter, yeah, then you load manage. But until then, you got to play to make sure you win that game. And one thing that bothers me, Adam, it drives me nuts sometimes because it's only a 17-game schedule. I don't understand why fans, so many fans, and even media think just because it's a non-conference game, it's not as important. Doesn't factor into the tiebreakers, the division tiebreaker, the conference tiebreaker. Guess what does factor into the tiebreakers, Adam? Your overall record.
Right.
So I don't care if they're playing a team from Timbuktu. You got to win the game, okay? Whether it's an NFC game or an AFC game. Everyone talks about the division games are so important. They only play 6 out of 11 or 6 out of 17 games are in the division, Adam. You know, it used to be there were 8 in a 16-game schedule, half the schedule. They are literally playing only a third of their games, just shy, obviously, just shy of a third of their games in division. So, yeah, they're important, but so are the other games too. So win the game that's in front of you.
And, oh, by the way, it's your opener, which sets the tone
at
for
home.
A lot of things at home. Yeah, I mean,
we're not trying to rag on Bill here. It's a perfectly understandable question, but that's my opinion. Every game matters, and you cannot go into it thinking, well, you know, we're going to tweak things here and not play this guy there. No. I don't care if you're playing Miami the next day. You win the game and do your absolute 100% best to make sure it happens.
Right. The load management happens around both of those games. And, oh, by the way, like we had said, if you're up comfortably in the fourth quarter, then you can afford to put yourself in a position to make some of those decisions. But short of that, absolutely not. All right. That is the time we have. Believe in Bills, the Wednesday edition. We're back on Friday. Sal, any final thoughts? Anything you want to plug in the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle or anywhere else before we wrap it up here?
Nope, just my usual. In the show notes is the link to the page that has all my Bills stories. So I appreciate all the support there. And I told you Monday, I just finished it today, man. What a lift it was, this Ray Davis story that I just finished. 3,300 words worth, Adam, of Ray Davis's incredible backstory. So that's going to be a big one for us when it publishes next week. So I hope everybody gets a chance to read that.
All right, very much looking forward to that, Sal. And I will be back in the building at WGRZ tomorrow. A little promo shoot for Sports Talk Live Buffalo.
Look at you coming out of retirement or semi-retirement, whatever you're calling it.
The R word is too strong, but I got trimmed up the beard today.
I see that. Looking good.
So we're looking forward to that. New time this year with John Scott, Vic Carucci, Paul Hamilton, and the rest of our WGRZ sports team Monday nights at 7 o'clock. Sports Talk Live Buffalo Channel 2, and that starts Week 1. So that's going to do it for Sal Maiorana in Rochester. I am Adam Benigni in Buffalo. This is Believe in Bills.